Welcome to Now NYC's Women Front and Center, our last candidate conversation before polls open in the New York City elections. We're cutting through the politics, getting to the facts, and identifying the candidates that will deliver for New York City women. Tali Farhadian Weinstein joins us today as the leading candidate for Manhattan District Attorney. Now NYC joined Gloria Steinem in proudly endorsing her historic candidacy. We believe that Tali is the one candidate who has both the bona fide expertise in prosecuting complex cases and the bold vision to reimagine this office. We believe that no other candidate is better equipped to reform our criminal justice system, empower survivors of sexual assault and gender-based violence, and keep our communities safe. Thank you so much, Tali, for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule of campaigning.
It's such a pleasure, Sonia, and thank you so much for that warm introduction and for all of the support, and most importantly, for everything that you do to fight for women.
Thank you so much. Well, let's start with, you have said that a big part of the reason of your decision to run for DA is to lead a wholesale transformation, which is the way you described it, of the Bureau's response to gender-based violence. Tell us how you would do that.
Yes, this really is so central to why I want to lead this office. And so I'm glad that you started here. And let's just take a step back and talk about where we find ourselves nationally, right? I am talking about a kind of violence that is often invisible, but it is endemic. We know that so many women experience some kind of sexual assault in the course of their lives. We know that even with the vast underreporting of gender-based crimes, so domestic violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, gender-based hate crimes, all of it, even with the vast underreporting, probably underreporting by 50%, according to leading researchers, we still see so much of this violence coming into prosecutors' offices. So I'll just give you just one window into that. When I was working in the Brooklyn District Attorney's office, the office was doing about 60,000 cases a year, and about 10,000 of them were domestic violence cases. So, and then if you think about how we're probably not hearing about half of the incidents of domestic violence that are happening, it's just really shocking and almost overwhelming. And by the way, these are all pre-COVID numbers, and we know that domestic violence got so much worse for the very obvious reason that people were stuck at home with the people that were abusing them in many cases during this long and really difficult year. So the violence is endemic. We know that people are not coming forward, that there's this lack of faith in the criminal justice system. Many people report saying, when I come forward, it's like a second trauma, or I'm not really going to get anything out of it. My needs are not going to be met. And so this is just, to me, calling out for just wiping out what has come before and doing things differently, and saying, this is going to be my first priority. I'm going to be the sheriff of gender-based violence. So what does that mean? A district attorney, Sonia, as you know, has so much authority and discretion in how she structures her office. And I believe that this is where I'm going to put the most resources. By resources, I mean prosecutors and investigators and counselors and analysts, and of course, money. And to put them all together in one bureau that deals with all of the different kinds of gender-based violence that I've just described. And to train these prosecutors and all of the people who work with them differently to know how to deal with these cases, which call on different skills, a different understanding of the law. And just as importantly, I think to have the moral courage and the commitment to bring the hardest cases, the cases that, for example, push against really biased and antiquated ideas about consent, right? That help people push past the shame of even reporting these crimes. And I'm just going to say one more thing. Prosecutors are only part of what people need when they are experiencing this kind of violence. And so when I talk about a wholesale transformation, what I'm envisioning is a DA's office that is kind of like a hub or one stop, where if you experience domestic violence, for example, you come in, we are there for protection and for accountability and for safety. But there will also be providers who can help you with things like immigration status, what to do about your kids, getting a job, mental health support, housing. Domestic violence is the #1 cause of homelessness in New York City. Amazing, right? And that all of that will be available to you so that there can actually be recovery and healing from experiencing these kinds of assaults and violence.
Well, thank you so much. What you have outlined is precisely what we have learned in our experience at the National Organization for Women, working side by side with district attorneys, the past 2, the NYPD, the past 4 commissioners, of exactly what needs to be done in the approach. So it is incredibly heartening for us to finally have someone who understands that this needs to be a priority and is not afraid to say it. And I like that. I like it. Sheriff of Gender-Based Violence. It's about time.
It's about time, right? And I've learned so much from you and your work. I mean, this is the thing. This is cumulative, and now it's about taking all of that and putting it into action and holding ourselves, Sonia, I want to say, accountable. Like if I don't do this, I will not have been a good DA.
Thank you. So
yeah,
you certainly have experience at DA's office. I mean, you were a leader at Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, which has been a progressive model for the country. Prior to that, you were a former U.S. attorney. You've investigated and prosecuted hundreds of cases, very complex cases, gun violence, murder, tax evasion, fraud. Tell people why that's important to have that experience and that leadership for someone who wants to head this office. And
yeah.
how does that make you really the most qualified in this race?
Yeah. So I do think that my experiences are really different in breadth and in depth from anyone else who was running. And, just to say, because people really have, I think, people don't really think about the DA's office and aren't even really conditioned to think that it's an elected office. So just to step back and describe it for a moment, this is an enormous bureaucracy. There are 1,200 people who work in the Manhattan DA's office. It has a budget of about $150 million a year. It's got about 600 lawyers and 600 support staff, which includes a mini police force, and includes social workers, it includes analysts, and so it's more than just about having good ideas, right? And having your heart in the right place. You need to know how to run this thing and to reshape this thing. I said earlier, Sonia, that the DA can decide where she wants to put her resources. And then those wind up being the things that get attention, right? I mean, you might have a district attorney who says, I only care about street violence, or I only care about white collar crimes, and just direct everybody there. So having the experience of having been at the side of DA Gonzalez as he dismantled, and we did this together, dismantled parts of the office, built out entirely new parts of the office, created policies that apply to every single ADA in the Brooklyn DA's office, which is actually slightly larger than Manhattan, monitored and enforced those policies, retrained prosecutors. All of that management and leadership experience, I think, is so important. And Sonia, I'm actually the only person in this big field of 8 people who has been a leader in a city prosecutor's office, and in a race that has been largely dominated by conversations about criminal justice reform. I am actually the only one who has rolled up my sleeves and done criminal justice reform in a DA's office. So this is not just about ideas. I mean, this is about reality and a record. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise that, like most things worth doing, this work is really hard. Not everything that we did worked, but we got up every day and we pushed forward. And I think we did create a national model. So there's that. And then to go back to earlier, your question, you asked about my other experiences. I draw on all of those too, because I spent 6 years making federal cases, right? And this was in Loretta Lynch's office. I'm so happy to be able to say I've now worked for 3 attorneys general of the United States, because Merrick Garland gave me my first job out of law school, and then I worked for Eric Holder, and then Loretta hired me to be a federal prosecutor before she went on to lead the Justice Department. And that's where I myself prosecuted violence and murder. And as you said, tax evasion. I know what it's like to go to the grand jury and put 75 witnesses in before deciding whether to bring a prosecution, to deal with national security matters, white collar cases. And that experience, I think, will particularly enhance my leadership of the Manhattan DA's office, because we can't just be reactive. It's not just about after the shot goes off in the street, going out and reacting to it, but it's about proactively building long-term investigations, whether they're white-collar investigations or gun trafficking investigations, right? Stemming the flow of guns into our city. And that's really what I learned how to do as a federal prosecutor. And then I'm just gonna add one more thing, which is, this is harder to put in a bottle, but it matters. There's sometimes a national spotlight on the Manhattan DA's office. Undoubtedly, there will be new questions of law against really sophisticated litigants on the other side. And this is where I draw on earlier in my career. You know, when I was a law clerk at the Supreme Court does about 80 cases a year. Those are the 80 hardest cases in the country that year out of 10,000 petitions that come in. Or when I worked for Eric Holder, I sat down every week with the Solicitor General to go over all of the litigation strategies of the department, the hardest questions that we were dealing with at that time. And so the judgment that comes from that, I think, is also really an important ingredient here.
Without a doubt. And it certainly makes me think about and feel it's really important to point out that you would be inheriting an office that right now has been involved in a year-long intense investigation of the former president, of Donald Trump. And that, as we've all been reading, has advanced through court cases, subpoenaing, getting all of his tax records and additional records. I mean, that is at a crucial point now. And we absolutely need someone who's going to be able to step into this role, who's going to be able to step right in and have the respect and be able to engender the authority of those very sophisticated prosecutors, who the team of them, the huge team that's actually putting this all together.
Yes. Yes. And as you know, I can't comment on any specific case. It would be unethical. I have to, you know, if I'm lucky enough to assume this office, look at everything with an open mind. But I can step back and say the kind of case that we are reading about in involving Donald Trump should focus the voter's mind on who can handle something like that. And it, you know, it's everything that you and I have just talked about, all of those experiences, the judgment that comes with that, and really being able to lead a team into answering unprecedented questions that will call in an understanding of federal jurisdiction and state jurisdiction and where they both meet, and being able to do that without feeling the pressure of the national spotlight or being intimidated by that in any way. And, you know, I love that you talked about the team because, you know, Sonia, I'm really proud to be a prosecutor. I think that this is the most honorable work to help people to feel safe and to enforce the rules of fair play. And I want prosecutors to succeed. Right. And I'm worried about the demoralization of prosecutors. I think we have to be able to talk about reforming the criminal justice system without saying that this work is inherently flawed. And I've been actually very dismayed in the course of this race in hearing, you know, sometimes the way that people talk about this office that we all depend on, right, for safety and for fair play.
Absolutely. I have been just alarmed and disheartened to hear people speak about it who are running for this position, who want to, their first order of business is to literally dismantle it or to cut the budget by a half. And, you know, this goes to the case of you, to be able to do these long-term investigations, you need the resources. And people who are public servants, who are working for the city, who are on the public's dime, if we're going to have them do a good job, they're going to need the resources to do that.
Right.
So
right. I mean, exactly.
Inclusive to reform it as well as ensuring that people have what they need to do their job.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, look, none of us want to waste money, and this has been a hard year for New York. But like this Bureau of Gender-Based Violence that we're talking about, that's going to require resources, right? Doing the work of wrongful convictions as I have in Brooklyn, that's going to require resources. Having a sterling white collar and economic crimes practice is going to require resources. And so I'm going to fight to make sure that the people who work for me have what they need to succeed and to be the best public servants.
So this Memorial Day weekend,
Yeah.
again, 15 shootings took place. I mean, this is a continuing pattern of violence and levels of crime, violent crime, that some have described as something they've never seen, because it's been that many decades since we have been at this point. How would you balance the need for public safety and criminal justice reform?
Yeah. So it has been just shocking this year in terms of the gun violence that we're seeing. I believe we are at about 505 shootings this year already in New York. And the last 4 weeks have been the bloodiest 4 weeks since any period since 1997. And, you know, as you said, now if you have a weekend with 15 shootings, sometimes you have a day with 10, 12, 15 shootings now, and it becomes completely metabolized. And like many, many crises in our city, the burdens are not evenly distributed. So the Times reported a couple weeks ago that 96% of the victims of shootings in New York City this year have been Black and Latino. And from what I can see, also, Sonia, these are kids who are dying, who are being shot, from babies all the way to young adults. So this, alongside gender-based violence, I mean, to me, these are the things that a DA has to think about first every single day when she wakes up. And the balance of safety and fairness, of safety and reform, applies everywhere, and it applies here. And I think we need to have rules, approaches that work in both hard times and in easy times, right? We don't change our values because we have a new challenge. We don't abandon fairness when we have a new challenge, and we don't abandon safety either. So I think we can do both. And I'll just offer some of the strategies that are in my, in my gun plan, and I think that they will sort of give you a picture of this balance that I'm talking about. So, first, when we talked about this earlier, when we talked about proactive investigations and capacity for that, we have to get at the trafficking and how these guns are getting into our very blue city, in our very blue state. Even when I was starting out as a prosecutor and we just did gun possession cases, early on, all the guns in my cases came from South Carolina and Virginia. So this pipeline, and it's a kind of contraband, right? In the same way that we think about drug trafficking investigations, we got to deal with that. We got to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, enforce those laws. We know that even if the gun doesn't go off in a home where there is violence, violence increases because of the presence of the gun, because it is an instrument of power and control. We have to enforce our ghost gun laws better. So those are all places where we're putting our foot on the gas pedal. But we also in Brooklyn had this wonderful program that I want to bring to Manhattan, which is quite innovative and different. So for young people, almost always men, who possessed a gun and it was their first charge, instead of the usual prosecution, 3 to 5 years upstate, you come home, you're still young, now you're hardened, more likely to reoffend. The DA had social workers run a program where people were selected to go into a very intensive diversion, right? And that means mental health resources and job training and family counseling and education. And the exchange was that if you did this, after 18 months to 2 years, the charges against you could be dismissed. And remember what I said earlier about hard work? Some things work, some things don't. You have to be innovative, and you have to try, and you have to be honest and measure. So the recidivism rates, the chances of reoffending when you come out of this program, are meaningfully lower than the old course. And that to me is why this is the right thing to do. So I would bring that over. And then the last thing is, we have to support people in the community who are dealing with violence before it erupts. The best thing that we can do is, in terms of the slush fund or the asset forfeiture funds that the DA's office has, is to put ourselves out of business. And so there's so many people who are on the ground in Manhattan who are doing that work, and I would be proud to support them. I've been working a lot with Jackie Rowe Adams, gun violence advocate, lost 2 of her sons in separate incidents to gun violence, and does this work, up in Harlem. And there's so many people like that, warriors on the ground. And They are our partners too.
Yeah. One of the things that has come up just recently in this campaign that has domestic violence advocates very alarmed is this idea of ending mandatory arrest policies for domestic violence felonies. Now, let me make sure everybody knows, not misdemeanors, but felonies. You have to really hurt someone or use a weapon to have a DV felony. We're talking about really dangerous situations. And, one of your opponents, candidate Alvin Bragg, has said that this is something he'd like to see end. Can you talk a little bit about what your approach would be and how dangerous?
I just about fell over when I heard him say that. It just seemed so careless to me so casually talk about undoing something that women had fought so hard for because it's so important to safety. So let me just explain what a mandatory arrest policy means and why it's so important. This is a policy that says that if you call the police and say, I've been assaulted, and as you said, Sonia, a felony assault is a really serious thing, the police have to make the arrest in that domestic violence situation. Because if not, if a woman calls the police and she doesn't have that assurance, and she runs the risk of enraging her assailant by making the call, right? By calling the cops on him, and then the police leave, and now she's exposed to more violence and danger than she was before. So for a candidate who wants to lead this office with this responsibility to keep people safe, to make that claim, I don't know if it came from ignorance or from just having different priorities, but it really shocked me. I think undoing that mandatory arrest policy would immediately put thousands of women at risk and in danger. And to go back to what we talked about, even further suppress reporting, which we know is already a problem of people not wanting to come forward when domestic violence happens to them.
Absolutely. You just simply cannot be cavalier like that with people's lives. We know that this saves lives. So can we talk a little bit about, I think as you mentioned earlier, many people don't really understand the scope of the district attorney's office. If you haven't been a crime victim or a defendant, you may not even have any interaction with it. How do you envision the DA and her staff having a role in rebuilding New York City post-COVID?
Yeah, I think this office is such an important part of the leadership that we're going to need for recovery for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, first of all, like if people don't feel safe, we're not going to have the recovery that we want. And that's safe everywhere, right? That's safe at home for all the reasons that we've talked about. It's safe in the street, safe in the subway. I was just out at a subway stop this morning to meet voters, and I was quite surprised at how many people told me that they feel their chest tighten up when they go down the stairs now. There's just this anxiety about experiencing violence, and particularly right now, for example, if you're Asian American, the idea that you might get shoved or pushed because of who you are is really weighing on people. And if people don't feel comfortable moving around and being out at night, and the streets are darker and restaurants are closed and people don't want to come in for the day and come back to work, and then they don't want to be tourists here, all of that follows from the responsibility of this job. So that's a big part of it. And I also think this is an opportunity, Sonia, because we haven't had an opportunity to elect a new DA in 12 years. And so people really aren't tuned in to this office. And I really envision an office that is just more present in communities, that is more accessible, where you can report crime directly. You don't have to go through the police. Sometimes it'd be easier to come to us. And that the office looks like people from all around the borough. It speaks to people and it speaks different languages. I mean, it's really reflective of the people who have empowered us and that we are meant to serve.
Thank you so much. It's interesting. Just this morning when I was having my coffee, I was thinking about my daughter is just the age where she's venturing out on her own. Like she can walk to school on her own and back. And my chest tightened thinking about the obvious next thought was the subway, mass transit. And I thought, oh, I can't I can't have her in the subway now. I just
Right.
can't do that. And I already see, the parent-child conflict because she's going to want to spread her wings. And I wouldn't have felt that way in the past. I have always felt really safe here.
No.
And
Yeah.
felt
And
very
it's,
privileged to feel that way.
yeah, and I hear this in every neighborhood around the city. And, because you shared that about your daughter, I want to say this is gendered also, that young girls experience different things, right? I have three daughters. And so I think I might worry about them differently. And so, the costs of this kind of anxiety and crime do affect girls and women differently. And I think we have to be honest about that, and how that kind of inhibition can really stay with you, right? And affect your choices and affect your freedom and affect your ability to thrive. And that's why the work that we do is so important, even when it feels kind of subtle, right?
Yes. So tell us, what is the most common misperception you believe voters have of you? And what do you want them to know instead?
Yeah, I've never run for office before, so it's so strange to put yourself out there, and to sometimes be understood and sometimes to be misunderstood, right? You're trying to tell people, thousands of people, who you really are through limited means. And, I will just tell you, Sonia, that I am so surprised still. I mean, call me naive, at how much I hear about my husband, who is not running for district attorney, who is a lovely, wonderful person who is not a candidate for office, in the course of this race. And, my husband works in finance, and it's just come to sometimes dominate and almost erase my identity. The fact that that's his work, that's his career. And so that feels like a misconception to me. I guess what I would want people to know about me in response to that is, I've had lots of different experiences in this country of having more and having had less. And I draw from all of them. I came here as a refugee from Iran with my family, with our life in a few suitcases. At first, we lived in one room on the Long Island Expressway. My parents worked really hard to incrementally make our life better and better. So I take something from all of those stops. I carry with me what it means to have an opportunity. I'm not better than the millions of people who are turned away at our borders, who are in desperate need. And I think that that's been a big part of the fuel in my tank, is knowing that we have to pay it forward. When you receive an opportunity, it's just such a privilege. And I feel privileged to have been able to do all the things that I've been able to do in this country. And just the last thing I'll say about this misconception, Sonia, is, when I got married to my husband, some things for sure changed in my life. But what didn't change is that I still got up at the same time every day and still did the same work. I've been a public servant for, coming on 20 years. And it's all I've really ever wanted to do, is to create opportunity for others, and safety being a precondition of opportunity has been my core conviction. And I'd love for that to just also be out there, while we also, we talk about, who I am.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we have maybe a couple of minutes before we'll let you go so you can get back to meeting voters.
Right.
We have a few audience questions, and so maybe I'll just pick a couple of them.
Sure.
One is here. I'm surprised and shocked that some candidates want to decriminalize the sex trade. What's your position?
Yeah, so I've taken a very different position from almost everybody else in this race on this. And here I'm also seeing carelessness and disregard for the safety of, not just girls and women, but disproportionately girls and women, LGBTQ youth. Let me say what I mean by that. So my view is something along the lines of what people call the equality model, or what Liz Kruger's recent legislation would make the law, which is people who are involved in prostitution, I think, need our help. They're not supposed to be prosecuted. Often these are very vulnerable people, kids who have run away from home, who are doing this work. But I can't believe that almost every other candidate in this race would actually decriminalize the entire industry of the buying and selling of other people's bodies, and that they just close their eyes to the fact that it's the most vulnerable who will find themselves sort of the instruments in this trade. And this is very strange terrain, Sonia, because I find that they use so many sort of euphemisms to get away from what is really going on. We don't want to prosecute, consensual sex. I don't think anyone wants to prosecute consensual sex. What I want to do is to make sure that we are protecting people from the very worst harms, and that we don't wind up living in a city where people can profit off of the vulnerability of others. And often, as I said, really young people who find themselves in these situations. We often disagree about this, and it seems to be a very live issue in this debate, in this campaign.
Well, thank you so much. I'm not going to add to it because I've been doing this work for so many years, and now has been involved in so much of the legislative efforts to provide services and to recognize human trafficking and the harms of the sex trade, and to aspire for women and our most vulnerable to have better opportunities. I mean, that's progress. That's a progressive ideal, to ensure that people can earn a living with dignity and safety and viability into the future. I mean, that's what equality is. But thank you so very much, and for putting that into perspective so well. And that bill, the Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act, is one that now is very involved in. So you can learn about it on our website at nownyc.org. So one quick question more. Actually, these questions you've really addressed them in all of your questions. Your plans for training existing staff, restructuring the office to meet the needs of your platform. I think that you addressed it as well in terms of resources and such. Is there anything you want to just end with quickly? You know what that could be, Tali, is you could let people know how they can get in touch with you.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to say two things to end. One is all that work that the last listener question was about. I need you to help me do that. So I hope that you will be my partners. As Sonia, I hope that now will come in and help me do this transformation that I think is so important. And now, that was a pun, unintended. Currently, I would love to hear from all of you. We've got 3 weeks left until this election is over. So please do engage. You can write to me at info@taliforda.com or to Annie@taliforda.com. She's my director of operations. And we'd love to hear from you. We could figure out how you can also, if this is moving to you, to support us in getting people invested and educated and committed to this race and all of the issues that are at stake in this race. We would love to have you and your partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today, Tali.